Welcome to this week's episode of Stranger Stitches. Today, we're going to raise the roof on one of true crime's saddest tragedies. I'm going to sprinkle in just enough tea and crumpets to keep it civil, but this story gets rough. It is taken from public sources and witness accounts and a lot of arrest records. This is not a news story. I have dragged up oral histories and local neighborhood gossip when I could get my hands on it because, let's be real, I do love me a good chin wag. So, grab the poison of your choice, plant your shapely ass in that chair, and buckle up, Buttercup. Today, we are diving headfirst into the beautifully ugly world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I remember the first time I heard the Sex Pistols. They didn't just blow me away. They took me to a place I didn't know exist. This wasn't music. It was my life, screaming at me through someone else's voice in blown speakers. It was raw. It was real. It was everything I needed. But I was too suburban white bread to know what that even was. I embraced every angry chord, every torn piece of clothing pinned together. Oh my gosh, it was everything. It raised a middle finger to all authority. I never looked back and I never outgrew it. The Sex Pistols were a British rock band that crawled out of London's gutter in the mid-70s and burned brightly for exactly 2.5 years. But in those brief yet chaotic years, they didn't just make music, they torched it. They rewrote the rules of fashion, told authorities to go F themselves, and proved that a rock band could be more than entertainment. It could be social class warfare. Now, these little bastards were masters at generating outrage and making headlines, probably thanks a lot to their manager, who kept them in the spotlight. But they all collectively understood that in a world of sheep, the only way to cut through and make your message clear was to be louder, angrier, and just a little bit dangerous. Even if you hated their guts, you knew who they were. Plenty of people hated them, but you couldn't ignore them. They didn't just create punk rock, they created a whole new way of being pissed off. The Sex Pistols built their reputation like a wrecking ball. It smashed the sacred cow of British society with an anti-establishment stance that burned pretty hot and scorched a little bit of fingers. These weren't your garden variety rebels. They were sonic terrorists with safety pins through their noses and 3-chord manifestos because that was basically all they could play, but it hit like lightning. Yeah, this was the voice of the gutter rising up to scream. This was the voice of the abyss, and it was a long time coming and not a minute too soon. But this music was not about those masturbatory 20-minute guitar solos or prancing and bouncing around the stage in sequined spandex, and God, wasn't that terrible? This was not cock rock or hair band. These guys were street fighters with amplifiers, loud, angry, fresh, and raw. Steve Jones's guitar sounded like a buzzsaw. Paul Cook's drums beat like a hammer. And let me tell you, the rest of the world of music was drowning in this progressive rock quicksand mess. It was endless noodling and concept albums about wizards and mystical bullshit that I just didn't get. The Sex Pistols grabbed rock and roll by the throat. Okay, so let me take you back a little bit. Song of the Year in 1975 is Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille. Oh, I nearly threw up on the keyboard when I typed that. Oh, but thank the rock gods that David Bowie crawled out with the Young Americans and Fame. That reminded me that beautiful music also had fangs and gave me the will to live on. Figuratively, I was never suicidal. So the Sex Pistols' only real album was Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, and it over time has gotten shortened to Never Mind or Never Mind the Bollocks. Well, this came on the scene like a baseball through the front window of polite society. This musical middle finger hit number one in the UK despite radio stations treating it like a daycare dumpster and record stores acting like they would burst into flames if they touched it. That is the beautiful paradox of punk. The harder the establishment tries to bury it, the deeper the roots grow. Owning a copy became every teenager's holy grail. It was a backstage pass to your own rebellion. Right quick, that album went platinum, proving that Revolution sells. Rolling Stone magazine named it the second best album of the previous 20 years, runner-up only to The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Later on, that same magazine ranked it 73rd on their list of 500 greatest albums of all time. Not bad for a band whose career lasted barely longer than a weekend bender. Dude, I'm with the band. So, let's go on and meet some of the members. Johnny Rotten, whose real name was John Lydon, was the band's venomous frontman, scarecrow thin, sneering at you in bondage breeches that were pinned together, and he looked like he'd been raised by wolves, haircut with an egg beater, and educated with broken bottles. This human razor blade didn't just sing. He put those lyrics directly into my brain with a voice that sounded like tires on gravel. Anarchy in the UK wasn't just a song. It was a battle hymn for everyone who had ever been told to sit down, shut the fuck up. And it wasn't just in the UK. This went round the world. Then we have Steve Jones. He attacked his guitar like it insulted his mother. Part weapon, part primal scream therapy. He wasn't trying to be the next guitar hero. He was trying to be the last. He was going to blow up the whole concept and dance in the ashes. Well, Jones was very versatile with his musicianship, and he even played bass on most of the album. Yeah, the only album. And that was because Sid Vicious, who we'll get to in a minute, could not play hardly at all. I think during live performances they actually turned off his pickup. But Steve Jones was evidence that, these musicians could do anything as long as they approached it with enough rage and conviction. Paul Cook didn't just play drums, he beat the shit out of them. Beat them like they owed him money. All power and zero patience with subtlety. The perfect rhythmic assault for a band who measured their success in decibels and social outrage. Even if he was keeping imperfect time. We have Glenn Matlock. He was the original bass player and the band's sort of secret weapon. He wrote the melodies that were catchier than the plague. Matlock had one fatal flaw in their little ecosystem. He was too clean, too middle class, too much like the enemy they were shouting about. He got the boot in 1977. He was kicked out for the crime of looking like he might actually have a future beyond the gutter. But other sources, and I think maybe he even said that he just got tired of the bullshit. Either way, he went on to other things. Then we come on to my teenage heartthrob, Sid Vicious. He was born Simon John Ritchie, and he just kind of stumbled into the band in 1977 like a beautiful disaster, looking for a place to happen. This guy couldn't play bass worth a damn. He could barely even play the radio, but he had something more valuable than musical talent. He was the living, breathing, bleeding embodiment of everything punk rock wanted to be. Okay, let me tell y'all something that I thought was hysterical. The story of God Save the Queen and the Silver Jubilee. In May 1977, the Sex Pistols dropped God Save the Queen right in the middle of the actual Queen's Silver Jubilee celebration. Talk about perfect timing. This song basically well, not basically, it full frontal called the monarchy a fascist regime and told the British class system to go F itself. This wasn't just to piss people off. It was a genuine working class rage at the whole I'm born better than you bullshit from the royal family and what they represented. Well, the BBC and every radio station in Britain banned it outright, making it the most censored record in British history. Of course, that just made everyone want to hear it more. Nothing sells records like telling people they can't have them. Well, the Sex Pistols manager, Malcolm McLaren, pulled off the ultimate middle finger and chartered a boat and had the band perform the song God Save the Queen on the Thames in the boat during the Queen's actual celebration parade. Well, of course, they got arrested, but the image of that band floating past the royal festivities while singing their version of God Save the Queen became punk legend. Let me tell you about the Bill Grundy interview. On December 1st, 1976, the Sex Pistols went on live TV. That was a big mistake by the network, and they basically said fuck all the time. Every couple of words, F, 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 bomb, multiple times every minute. The host, Bill Grundy, was trying to be clever and wound up getting the band to swear their asses off on national television. Overnight, they went from nobody to the talk of the town. The next day, the Daily Mirror ran the headlines. This was headlines called The Filth and the Fury. And suddenly everyone in the country had an opinion about these four guys from London. Half of the country thought they were dangerous degenerates, and the other half thought they were speaking truth and power. Either way, everyone was still listening. Now, you can't talk about the Sex Pistols without mentioning Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren. They ran a shop called Sex that became ground zero for punk fashion. Ripped clothes, safety pins, offensive slogans that would define that look of rebellion for decades. I'm going to tell you what, I owned plenty of it, and what I couldn't afford, I made. And isn't that kind of the spirit of the thing? Thrift store shopping and pinning it together and just making it totally your own. The clothing itself was a form of expression. John Lydon said later, we made our own scandal just by being ourselves. But the truth is, McLaren and Westwood created a perfect storm. The music, the fashion, the controversy all worked together to create something bigger than the band. They created the whole damn movement. McLaren said he was using people as his art medium. And I don't mean that in an ugly kind of way. This was performance art. And they were doing it times 10. Have y'all heard of a little band called The Clash? I love me some Clash. And I still do. Never outgrew that either. The Clash's first live performance was opening for the Sex Pistols in 1976 at the Black Swan Pub. You want to hear a poem? It was written years ago, and it still tugs my heartstrings a bit. Sid and Nancy, burning souls colliding in the neon wasteland of Chelsea hotel nights and needle-sharp mornings, the love story written in heroin scrawl across the bathroom mirror of punked-out mythology. America met England in the form of damaged goods. She, the suburban nightmare child turned groupie prophet. He, the sneering bass slinger who couldn't play a note but could bleed authenticity from every pore. Their dance was destruction, beautiful, horrible, inevitable, as gravity pulling two falling stars toward the same black hole while the world watched, and called it romance, called it punk, called it anything but what it was. Two kids drowning in full view of the shore. I won't say who wrote it just in case you hate it. Wasn't me. Well, let's move on to the heart of our tragedy. Now that you know the history and kind of what a big deal this was at the time, and how many headlines they were crossing. Let me tell you what I know about Nancy. Nancy Laura Spungen was born 1958 in Philadelphia into what looked from the outside to be a typical middle-class Jewish family, but inside the house all hell was cutting loose from day one. This kid came into the world like a hurricane with abandonment issues. She never stopped screaming long enough for anyone to figure out why. Her mother later said that as a baby, Nancy did nothing but scream, and that was just the warm-up act for the chaos that followed. Her birth was marked by entering the world with the umbilical cord around her neck. It had caused some oxygen deprivation and required her to stay in the neonatal ward for quite some time, I think. Her mother was not allowed to hold or comfort her. So we know about attachment disorders now. That wouldn't happen now, but the damage was done to Nancy, and maybe that's what got that ball rolling. Who knows for sure? From the moment she could walk, Nancy was throwing suicidal, cursing fits that, could make a person blush. At 8 years old, most kids are worried about cooties and homework. Nancy was already contemplating how to check herself out permanently. Yeah, at 8 years old. By 11, she'd been expelled from public school for behavior so erratic that it frightened the staff. Her parents were desperate to find someone who could help their little tiny tornado, so they shipped her off to specialized institutions like the Devereaux Glenholm School in Connecticut. But Nancy was not in any way interested in being fixed. She was too busy perfecting the art of self-destruction. But she had an IQ in the superior range. That's all they said was in the range. They didn't give me an exact number. This girl was smart as a whip. When she wasn't busy trying to burn the world down, Nancy couldn't make friends either. Now, at home, she terrorized her younger sister, Susan, she was totally vicious and was genuinely frightening to the family, but she worshipped her little brother David like he was some sort of idol. The girl was chalk and cheese, wrapped in barbed wire, doused in gasoline, all in one package. Now, let me ask you something. You saw that first child. Would you have taken a chance on 2 more? I don't know. But apparently, the other children, happy, healthy, normal lives. By 15, Nancy had attempted suicide, been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and discovered heroin. All by 15. She had a holy trinity of teenage destruction. She was pumped so full of antipsychotics and bounced around between residential facilities like a pinball. And mental health treatment in the 70s was, a screen door on a submarine. It was there, but not real useful. And Nancy fell through the cracks every time. You know what? I don't think she fell through. I think if she saw a crack in the system, she dove into it. Well, she briefly tried college and, probably just to prove that she could, and then fuck this, dropped out. Well, maybe she didn't drop out. One source led me to believe that she was asked to leave because she was a thief. Other kids' stuff went missing, and it was all found in her room, not even particularly hidden. Just took stuff, displayed it in her room, showed people she could, got her ass kicked out, and she could say she gave it the old college try. When she was 17, Nancy did what a lot of suburban kid dreams of. She ran away to New York City to reinvent herself as a punk rock princess. Her brothers and sisters said that whatever music was on the horizon, Nancy had her finger on it. She always knew what was up and coming, and punk rock was going to be a big thing. She went to be a part of that. In the city's underground clubs and venues, Nancy found her tribe. Among misfits, outcast, creating the punk music fashion. The whole genre was there for her. She supported herself through prostitution and music journalism, a combination that captured her duality of destruction and intelligence. Nancy wasn't just some groupie hanging around for free drugs and backstage passes. She actually wrote articles and reviews that showed she understood what the scene meant culturally, and then she got it. She totally got it. The anger, the rebellion, the middle finger to societal expectations. But Nancy's escape from suburban hell was to be her descent into something much darker. Without parental supervision, the scene gave her the freedom to be as fucked up as she wanted to be. And Nancy took that invitation and oh, you know what? I get so upset because this could have been so many of us. But Nancy took that freedom and ran with it and, made of her life exactly what she wanted, and that was nothing good. Her family dynamic was a special kind of toxic that could make your therapist cry. Her mother, Deborah Spungen, later poured her pain into a memoir called And I Don't Want to Live This Life. A title pretty much sums up the whole family experience. Deborah's description of her daughter was brutally honest. She said, and I quote, "Nancy is a rotten kid. She hates being alive. She hates herself. She wants to destroy herself. There is something wrong with her brain that makes her different from other people. She can't control herself. She's always in pain, emotional pain. She screams because she's in pain." End quote. Deborah didn't stop there. In interviews, she revealed the full extent of the nightmare. From the time she was 2 months old, she would bang her head against the side of the crib until it bled. By the time she was 18 months, she would grab things, throw them. She would bite people and kick. She would scream for hours. The doctor said that she was hyperkinetic. Yeah, hyperkinetic. But Deborah says that she knew something more serious was wrong. The mother's assessment was harsh, but it came from a place of absolute desperation. She said, "I was afraid of my own daughter. I was afraid she would hurt one of the other children. I was afraid she would hurt herself. I was afraid she would hurt me. Living with Nancy was like living with a terrorist in your own home." Oh, end quote. This wasn't tough love or disappointment. This was a mother watching her child self-destruct from such an early age and being powerless to stop it, knowing that loving Nancy meant accepting that she might not survive her own rage. Deborah's brutal honesty reflected the desperate frustration of parents trying to help a child whose problems were beyond conventional solutions at the time. I'm really not sure what they do with those sort of kids even now, and I know that those kids are not all that rare. This kid was determined to burn down everything she touched, including herself. Simon John Ritchie was born into a shitstorm of dysfunction in Lewisham, the son of John and Anne Ritchie. His mother, Anne, had dropped out of school and joined the British Army, where she met his father, a guardsman at Buckingham Palace, who moonlighted as a trombone player on the London jazz scene. Sounds romantic, right? Not even close. After Simon was born, Anne packed up and moved to Ibiza. Love me some Ibiza. But she took her baby with her, expecting the father to follow. Well, he never showed up, never sent money, never gave a damn. Anne was left alone with a kid to raise, scraping by in Ibiza by selling weed to tourists just to keep food on the table and, most of the time, a roof. Talk about being abandoned. This kid's father basically said F off to his own son before the kid could even walk. Anne eventually had to crawl back to England with the help of the British Embassy, like some kind of refugee from her own bad choices. She later married Christopher Beverley, probably thinking she'd add some sort of stability for herself and her kid, but 6 months later, the guy dropped dead of kidney failure. You can't make this shit up. This poor kid could not catch a break. So they moved on and settled in Tunbridge Wells, Kent, where Simon attended Sandown Court School, just a normal kid trying to get through a normal day while his mother dealt with one disaster after another or brought them on herself. No judgment from me. In 1971, they moved to the rough neighborhood of Stoke Newington in Hackney, East London. Simon started going by John Beverly. Maybe he was trying to distance himself from his absent father, or distance himself from what he had been or who they were, or maybe just trying to be somebody else entirely. By 1973, Anne's life had gone completely off the rails, and she was shooting heroin, couldn't function as a mother anymore. Her addiction was so bad, she didn't even know her own son was attending Kingsway College, trying to finish his 0 levels and maybe get a step ahead. While other kids were worried about homework, Simon was telling school counselors that he wanted to kill himself. Imagine being 16 and feeling that hopeless. No, don't imagine it. Don't. I wouldn't want anyone else there. And oh my gosh. Well, that's when Anne made a decision that would fuck up her son for life. She kicked him out, just threw him away like flowers in a dustbin. In 1988, she gave an interview, and she didn't sugarcoat any of her behavior. She said, "I remember saying to him, it's either you or me, and it's not going to be me. I have got to try to preserve myself, and you can just fuck off." End quote. He told her, "I've not got anywhere to go." And to that, she replied, "I don't care." Barely missed Mother of the Year, didn't she? A mother telling her 16-year-old son that she doesn't care where he goes, that's not tough love. That's mindfuckery, and for a mother to do that to her own kid is unforgivable. But remember Anne, because she's going to raise her ugly head again. That's the moment when Simon John Ritchie started to die a little bit inside, long before he became Sid Vicious. This kid was thrown away by everyone who was supposed to love and care and protect, and people wonder why he ended up the way he did. Thanks, Mom, so much. Let's put those two together. Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen met in London in December 1976. Their connection was immediate and intense. Their bond was characterized by turbulence, marked by mutual dependency and drug addiction. They were codependent and dependent on drugs, and, toxic. Totally toxic for both parties. The relationship represented a perfect storm of psychological instability, substance abuse, and the pressure that fame was creating. It was a destructive cycle, and either they didn't want to or couldn't escape. When these two damaged people found each other, it was like watching the crawdads crawl out of a pole. They just keep pulling each other down. And Sid was already effed up from abandonment and self-hatred. Nancy was running from her own demons with a needle in her arm. Together, they were a tornado of destruction that sucked each other down and everyone around them. Most people believe that Nancy introduced Sid to heroin, and that first hit was like opening the gates of hell. Here is a kid who'd been abandoned by everyone, and now he had something that made all that pain disappear. Even if it was for a few hours, the drug didn't become just escape. It became his entire world. Everything else, the band, the friends, the future, became secondary to the next fix. Their relationship was a nightmare of domestic violence, substance abuse, heroin addiction, and the artistry of the climate. They created chaos wherever they went. They'd fight like animals, screaming, hitting, and then screw like their lives depended on it, and then shoot up together and pass out in their own vomit. This wasn't love. This was two people feeding off each other and their addictions to avoid dealing with the pain. As their drug use spiraled out of control, so did their behavior. They'd overdose, get rushed to the hospital, and then be back on the streets looking for their next fix before the doctors could even finish the paperwork. They'd show up at clubs so wasted they couldn't stand, causing scenes and fights that made them the most notorious people on the circuit. The desperation was written all over their faces, hollow eyes, track marks, the constant look of people who knew they were dying and either couldn't or didn't want to stop. The couple became emblematic of punk's nihilistic ethos, and they were often referred to as that world's Bonnie and Clyde, a comparison that highlighted both their romantic devotion and their destructive impact. But calling them romantic was bullshit. They were addicted and enabling each other and enabling each other's death wish. The media loved the story because it fit the narrative about punk being dangerous and destructive, but they missed the real tragedy of kids so hopeless that they didn't want to escape. Sid was already broken. Nancy had been misplaced, and together they just broke faster. Band members watched helplessly as their friend disappeared into addiction, becoming a ghost of the person they'd once known. They tried intervention, threats, ultimatums, but nothing worked. When you're that deep in heroin addiction, nothing else matters. Not your friends, not your career, not your life. The drug becomes your God, and you sacrifice everything to it. The real tragedy wasn't that two people fell in love and died. It was two people that found each other already dying. So together, they're all in love, and they move in over at the Chelsea Hotel. This is quite a place, and I would love to visit. I'm going to put that on my bucket list. Let's all go to the Chelsea. Well, I don't think they're open now. No, I see that they're not. Anyway, would have been great. Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen resided at the Chelsea Hotel in New York City during the last months of their lives. The Chelsea Hotel wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a universe unto itself, a crumbling cathedral of creativity where genius and madness lived side by side in perfect chaotic harmony. This was ground zero for America's Bohemian Underground, a place where you could stumble out of your room at 3 a.m. and find Leonard Cohen writing poetry in the hallway while Janis Joplin practiced scales 3 floors up, and some unknown painter covered the walls with abstract masterpieces that now are worth millions. Marilyn Monroe's ex-husband, Arthur Miller, who moved into the Chelsea after the divorce, offered a succinct summation of that bohemian ambiance. "This hotel does not belong to America," he wrote. "There are no vacuum cleaners, no rules, and no shame. A scary and optimistic chaos which predicted the hip future and at the same time has the feel of a massive, old-fashioned sheltering family." That sounds nice. And that sheltering family was exactly what drew broken souls like Sid and Nancy to his door. Here, nobody gave a shit if you were famous or fucked or both. The Chelsea was a democracy in action. Your art was your currency. Your weirdness was your passport. Your pain was just another ingredient in the beautiful, terrible soup of human experience that simmered in every room. Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe, they also resided at the Chelsea. Punk poetess Patti Smith and the man she described as the artist of her life, legendary photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, moved into the Chelsea in 1969, room 1017. Famous for being the smallest in the hotel, it became theirs for just $55 a week, a princely sum. That price wouldn't buy you a good burger in Manhattan today. It was, in Smith's words, a tremendous stroke of luck to land up here. To dwell in this eccentric and damned hotel provided a sense of security as well as a stellar education. And that education was pure bohemian immersion. The artist, Sandy Daly, whose room was completely white, except for silver helium balloons floating like artificial suns against the ceiling, she had lent Mapplethorpe her Polaroid camera. His first photographs were taken within those white walls, beginning a career that would revolutionize art photography. Love him or hate him, you know who he is. No such thing as bad art, right? This was how the Chelsea worked. Casual encounters between artists led to career-defining moments. You'd borrow a camera from a neighbor and accidentally discover your life's calling. The hotel's history reads like a who's who of American counterculture. Jack Kerouac wrote parts of On the Road within its walls. Dylan Thomas drank himself to death when its rooms. Mark Twain, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Allen Ginsberg, Thomas Wolfe, Andy Warhol, Leonard Cohen, William S. Burroughs, Arthur C. Clarke. Wasn't Arthur C. Clarke another one of Marilyn's exes? Anyway, that's who all was there, and many, many others. The guest list was a roster of rebels, visionaries, and beautiful disasters. So, let me tell you why the Chelsea was such a magnet for these folks. It was a residence hotel where each room functioned as an independent apartment. Of course, price varied. Some had shared bathrooms and kitchens, while others were fully equipped, even with laundries in them. But all offered something precious, affordable housing in Manhattan without the bullshit of credit checks, references, or bank loans. For artists living paycheck to paycheck and often with no paycheck at all, the Chelsea was true salvation. The hotel's longtime manager, Stanley Bard, who passed away in 2017, was the eccentric ringmaster of this beautiful circus. Bard understood that great art rarely comes from people who could afford traditional housing. His charismatic approach created a community where tenants could wander into whatever party they wanted, where struggling artists like Patti Smith could offer paintings in lieu of rent, art that hangs throughout the halls, or used to hang through the halls, is worth small fortunes today, and where the line between landlord and patron got really, really blurry. I wonder if Mr. Bard made a little money off that. I hope so, because he was doing them a great service. The Chelsea's culture was built on the understanding that creativity flourished in chaos. The great art that emerged from the collision of disparate souls seeking beauty in the world that often seemed determined to crush it. It was a place where you could be broke and brilliant, where your addiction might be the price of your genius, where love and art and madness danced together in rooms that had witnessed both transcendence and tragedy. And more to come. By the time Sid and Nancy arrived at the Chelsea, it had become more than a hotel. It was a living museum, a place where the boundaries, all kinds of boundaries, just sort of dissolved so completely that every day felt like performance art and every night promised either revelation or ruin. The railing on the stairs, you've probably seen it. If you look up, it's like a square spiral. Yeah, you've seen that in films. It became iconic in this world of artists climbing up and down those steps like angels and demons on Jacob's ladder. They carry dreams and damage, equal measures. So, I know I waxed a little poetic, but this is my genre. That was my life. Sorry, y'all. Anyhow, I hope this is imparting to you what a big deal this was and how meaningful it was and how it touched so many people, because it inspired people like, Harry Rollins to go on and go with Black Flag and all that stuff. And he might have been a powerhouse and still is. Love me some Rollins, but they will never have done it first. And I was so young then, and I was not used to anything like this happening. And it happened to people that were so meaningful to me. I know you can hear it. It still brings a tear. Nancy's death. On October 12th, 1978, Nancy Spungen was found dead in room 100, the Chelsea Hotel in New York. And she had suffered a single stab wound to her abdomen. She was only 20 years old, and her death marked the beginning of one of rock history's most controversial and unresolved mysteries. The Chelsea Hotel, already famous as being a refuge for artists, writers, and musicians, became the site of a tragedy that would overshadow its cultural significance and become synonymous with the destructive excesses of the punk era. Let's follow her timeline of her last day. And when we get to the end, let's see what you think happened. On the last night of Nancy Spungen's life, it began like so many others with a desperate search for drugs and chaos. By 9:45 p.m. on October 11th, Sid and Nancy had visited their friends Kathy O'Rourke and Neon Leon Webster in room 119. The scene that Kathy witnessed was already ominous. Sid sat on Leon's bed looking through old photos of himself and saying ruefully, "I've lost my looks. I really used to look so good." Nancy paced the room frantically, begging everyone to come up with some drugs, some good drugs, while Sid sat quietly stroking his face with one of his new knives that had been a gift from Nancy and muttering that he had no future. When Nancy saw him with the blade to his face, she snapped, "Fuck off," and he put it down. Then she showed off her strength, telling Sid, "Feel my muscle. I'm so strong. I carried Sid up from the restaurant. I can carry him, but he can't carry me." Okay, kind of non sequitur, but moving on. Around midnight, the couple left Leon's room when Kathy went to her go-go dancing job in New Jersey. Leon claimed that he went to Max's Kansas City club, but Malcolm McLaren doubted this since no one saw him there. According to conflicting accounts, Sid and Nancy either returned to their own room or Sid left the hotel entirely around this time. The testimonies could never align. I never could get anything together that matched up. And it created a whole lot of what were many inconsistencies in this whole investigation. By 2:30 a.m., the desperation was sitting in. Nancy had called a guy named Rockets Red Glare at his Queens apartment, frantically begging him to come to Chelsea and please bring Dilaudid, a powerful synthetic morphine, and it went by the street name of D4s. She also requested some new hypodermics, revealing just how deep their addiction had become. When Rockets arrived at 3:15, he found Nancy wearing a long t-shirt over black underwear and Sid lying on the bed in black pants and a shaggy sweater. Both were clearly messed up, but Nancy was agitated about not being able to score, while Sid kept dragging himself up to check the door every time he heard a noise. During the 2 hours that Rockets spent in their room from 3:15 to just before 5, the phone rang consistently, but Nancy only answered once for a very brief conversation. The couple talked mostly about scoring Dilaudid, with Nancy offering to pay $40 each for each D4 and promising Rockets $800 if he could get her 40 of them. She had $1,400 in new bills to spend on drugs that night, money that would later become a crucial piece of the evidence. Rockets was an ex-addict himself, usually injected Sid because his veins were so collapsed from constant use. Nancy's tolerance was much higher. She could shoot 6 D4s, while Sid could only do 4. But that night, there were no D4s to be found. Now, the timeline gets real dirty around between 4 and 5 a.m., with multiple witnesses providing conflicting accounts. Neon Leon claimed Nancy called him at 4 a.m., saying that they were very high on Tuinals and Sid was crashing out, asking if they had any pot. Around 4:15 a.m., Leon and his companion Kelly heard loud knocking at their door, which they ignored. Later, they claimed to hear something metallic drop in the hallway. Maybe a knife, they said. Shortly before 5 a.m., as Rockets was leaving, he observed Stephen C., whom he identified as Sid and Nancy's regular Quaalude and Tuinal dealer, entering the elevator. At 5 a.m., hotel security was called to deal with complaints about some guy banging away at the door of room 228. Kenny, the night bellhop, found Sid Vicious wandering the hallway in an extremely agitated state. "He went to hit me," Kenny recalled. "He asked me could I take him, and he went at me again, so I hit him and just kept pounding on him till he went in the floor." Oh boy, what a night for Kenny. When Kenny had subdued him, Sid whined, "Is this what you do to a drunk?" Sid's face was bloody, with blood all over his nose and his t-shirt. Kenny left him around 5:15 a.m., unsure if Sid had returned to his room or not. About half hour later, 5:30 a.m., an unidentified hotel resident claimed that Sid staggered into her room dripping with blood. Ooh, this sighting would be crucial to the timeline as it placed Sid covered in blood well before Nancy's estimated time of death, just before 7:30 a.m. Vera Mendelsohn, who lived next door to Sid and Nancy in room 102, heard a series of moans coming from their room. She described the sounds as coming from a person who was alone because she didn't call someone's name. She was just moaning. These moans terrified Vera, likely marked Nancy's final moments as she bled out from the stab wound in her abdomen. That morning brought the discovery of Nancy's body. At 9:30 a.m., hotel desk clerk named Herman Ramos received an anonymous call from a male voice claiming there's trouble in room 100. Before the bellhop could investigate, Sid himself called down at 10 a.m. saying someone is sick, need help. Between 10 and 10:30 a.m., Ramos called for an ambulance and police at 10:30 a.m. as NYU student Rob Braden left for school. He saw Sid coming up the stairs and walking toward his room. By 10:45, an ambulance and police had arrived to discover Nancy's body on the bathroom floor between the sink and the toilet of room 100. When Vera Mendelsohn was awakened by the commotion and granted permission to look into the room, she saw Nancy's body on the bathroom floor and Sid surrounded by police in the hallway. His face looked battered, she recalled, and he said many times over and over, "Baby, baby, baby." She believed he was weeping. When Sid recognized her, he said, "I killed her. I can't live without her." Vera was so stunned, she couldn't recall whether she said couldn't recall if Sid said she fell on the knife or she must have fallen on the knife. But she remembered him talking about being very high on Tuinal. By 1 p.m. that day, the Forensic Crime Scene Unit arrived and processed what Police Sergeant Thomas Kilroy called our first punk rock murder. The suspected murder weapon was a Jaguar K11 folding knife with a 5-inch blade, complete with bloodstains and fingerprints. Ironically, according to Neon Leon, the knife was a gift he got from Nancy that same day, she says, to protect himself. Detective Gerald Thomas confirmed that more than one knife was confiscated from the scene. It was known that Sid and Nancy did have a penchant for collecting these things. The forensic team initially overlooked crucial evidence. Yeah, imagine that. Lying right out in plain sight, 3 hypodermic needles, a bottle of Tuinal pills, and some brown flaky powder, all virtually drenched in blood. These items were discovered by Dr. Gita Natarajan, an associate medical examiner who arrived at the apartment around 3:30 p.m. and was regarded by colleagues as an ace in her field. The crime scene revealed the couple's lifestyle. 3 large trunks where they stored possessions, mostly in plastic Harrods shopping bags. 1 bag contained photos of the couple, memorabilia in plastic envelopes, enough black hosiery to cover a convent, and Sid's celebrated chains and locks. Photos showed the half-inch thick metal bike chain found around both Sid's neck and Nancy's throat at different times. The autopsy was completed by 8:30 p.m. on Friday, and it concluded that Nancy died from external and internal hemorrhaging caused by a 1-inch wide incision in her lower abdomen, deep enough to rupture deep blood vessels. Her body also showed track marks, contusions, and 2 significant bruises on her face, one the size of a quarter on her chin, another larger bruise near her right eye. These facial injuries corresponded with reports of Sid bashing Nancy over the head with his guitar in a recent fight. Nancy had shown up at Leon and Kathy's room the night before wearing a red beret to hide the bruise, saying, "Will you fucking look what Sid did to me?" Dr. Natarajan explained that a knife wound as opposed to a bullet wound cannot be distinguished definitely as homicide or suicide, but there was no note. Usually if it's a suicide, there could be some other evidence, but there was not evidence to stand up as suicide. The medical examiner's job was complicated by Nancy's deteriorated condition from drug addiction and her violent relationship. As James O'Connor noted, a person who dies with a lot of drugs on board dies very differently than a person not on drugs. Toxicology tests continued and were found positive for heroin, morphine, Tuinal, Dilaudid, methadone, and Quaalude, and pot. Wow, what a cocktail. Current speculation placed the stabbing between 6 and 7 a.m., with the death occurring between 8 and 10 a.m. Early Thursday morning, the police arrested Sid Vicious, charging him with second-degree homicide in Nancy Laura Spungen's death, the most serious murder charge for the death of a civilian, reserved for either murder with intent or conscious participation in a suicide. Sid Vicious was immediately arrested and beginning a legal process that would never reach a resolution due to his own death before the trial. His initial response to police questioning was a confession. He claimed, "I did it," telling officers, "because I'm a dirty dog." However, this admission was complicated by his severe intoxication and the circumstances surrounding the discovery of Nancy's body. Later, Sid gave conflicting accounts of the events. He is not a reliable narrator at this point, including claims that he had no memory of what happened due to being in a drug and alcohol stupor, and alternative explanations such as Nancy having fallen on the knife during a struggle or an accident. The murder weapon was identified as the Jaguar K11 hunting knife, which was a gift, adding another layer of irony. The fact that the weapon belonged to the couple, one of many knives that belonged to the couple, kind of raised questions about whether someone had just grabbed what was handy. The crime scene also revealed that the room had been robbed of around $1,500. That's pretty close to the figure that Nancy said she had to spend on drugs that night. It led investigators to consider theories that the drug dealer or other party guest may have been involved in Nancy's death. The evidence suggested that the murder might not have been a simple case of domestic violence, but could have involved outside parties with financial motives. The presence of multiple people in and around the hotel room that night, combined with the couple's involvement and the drug transactions, created a pretty complex scenario. Filmmaker Alan Parker's documentary, Who Killed Nancy, was based on 182 interviews, of people connected to the case, and represented a pretty comprehensive re-examination of the police files and evidence. And it led to the conclusion that this just does not add up. And Alan Parker, I agree with you, pointing to the inconsistencies in all the witness testimony, considering all the drugs and alcohol and and dynamics that were going on, how could you possibly get a straight answer out of anybody? And they all may be telling what they believe to be the truth. And because Sid was a poor soul, and he might not have been actually guilty of Nancy's murder, but he became the scapegoat because he was an easy target. So, following his arrest, Sid had spent about, 6 weeks in jail or so. He was out on a $50,000 bail, which was paid by his mother, Ann Beverly. This release allowed him to return to his lifestyle, and while he was awaiting trial, it set the stage for the final tragedy in his story. The decision to grant bail to someone with such severe addiction problems and a history of his behavior was a fatal mistake. It disallowed for Nancy's death to go to trial. Here's a fucked up truth. The same woman who'd thrown her 16-year-old son out in the streets has now posted his bail. What was her motivation? What was her reason? Why couldn't she just stay out of his life? She didn't want him in the first place, so Ann Beverly, just move along. But Mother of the Year, Ann Beverly, was still shooting heroin herself and suddenly became her son's savior. And I say executioner, but it depends on how you look at it. She knew exactly what putting Sid back on the street would mean. He would go straight back to the needle, back to the same cycle of addiction that had destroyed everything they'd touched. But she paid his bail anyway. So the weeks between his release and his death were like a slow motion suicide. Sid wandered the streets of New York, completely lost without Nancy. He'd show up at friends' house and apartments, strung out, broken, drunk, fucked up, mumbling about wanting to die, about how he couldn't live without her. Everyone could see that he was spiraling even lower, but nobody could stop it. His mother, sure as shoot, wasn't helping. But she was too busy feeding her own addiction to worry about her son. While waiting trial, Sid Vicious died of a heroin overdose on February 2nd, 1979, at the age of 21. His death occurred just 4 months after Nancy's murder or suicide, and effectively ended any possibility of ever determining the truth about what happened in that Chelsea hotel room that night. The overdose was particularly tragic, and I'm going to cry again, because it represented the culmination of a pattern of self-destructive behavior that had coursed all the way through his time with Nancy and his time with the Sex Pistols. But let me tell you what gets me mad every freaking time. Let's call it what it is. Matricide. By needle. Ann Beverly didn't just provide the heroin that killed her son. She delivered it to him like room service. She shot him up herself. This was a woman who had started killing her son years ago, and now coming around to finish the job she'd started. She knew exactly what pure heroin would do to someone whose tolerance had dropped from his time in jail. She knew it would kill him, and she gave it to him anyway. The circumstances of that final night, Sid had been clean, or at least cleaner, during his time in jail. His tolerance was way down. Ann showed up with the bag, and it was like handing a loaded gun to somebody who already had intentions. She prepared the injection herself and sat there and watched him die. Some reports say she even helped him tie off his arm. That's motherly love. That's murder disguised as mercy. His mother, Ann Beverly, who was a heroin addict herself, is widely speculated to have done this intentionally to save her son from what could have happened in court. He wouldn't have survived in jail, and he wasn't determined to survive without Nancy. She was, in her mind, helping him escape a world that had become unbearable. She had a chance. She could have got help, got him into treatment. You know, that money she spent bonding him out could have gone a long way towards doing something else. Maybe she didn't want to live any longer with the pain of what she had done to him. Anne Beverly died herself of a heroin overdose in 1996 at the age of 58, completing the family tragedy that had spanned 2 generations. Long-term addiction, the irony is sickening. The woman who killed her son with heroin eventually died the same way, alone and abandoned, just like she'd left him. Some might call it poetic justice, but there's nothing poetic about 2 people destroying each other, and that became 3 people. I don't know, Anne did it to herself, but yeah. Either way, there's 3 people dead. A suicide note was found in Sid's pocket after his death stating, "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my half of the bargain. Please bury me next to my baby in my leather jacket, jeans, and motorcycle boots. Goodbye." End quote. This note provided evidence that Sid's death was intentional and that he viewed it as fulfilling a promise he made to Nancy. The romantic language of the note reflected the couple's view of their relationship as a tragic love story. Oh, but it also demonstrated a lot of mutual destruction. That death pact wasn't some beautiful Romeo and Juliet fantasy. It was 2 addicts, so codependent they couldn't go on without the other. What would Nancy have done if Sid died first? I mean, from all the evidence, it was inevitable. And we don't know that Nancy didn't do this to herself. She always said that she would not live to be 21. Did she herself have to make that come true? The practicality of Sid's final wish proved impossible to fulfill. Nancy had been buried in a Jewish cemetery, and her family refused permission for Sid's ashes to be scattered there, denying the couple the reunion that Sid and Nancy both had envisioned. This rejection by Nancy's family, I feel, was totally reasonable, but gone is gone for both of them, and oh dear, I don't know if I would have fought it that hard. The separation of their remains became a symbol of the destructive nature, and finally, Nancy's parents did have some control. But a resource does tell me that there are rumors that his mother took his ashes to Nancy's grave and dumped them there without permission. He and his baby are finally together and hopefully at peace. It seems like that would be easy enough to prove by testing the soil and stuff, but don't. Please don't tell me if you do know. I want to believe that what happened and the love that Sid and Nancy did truly have, that it goes on somewhere in the universe, and they are at peace, finally. That's what I want to believe. But dirty truth is, we will never know. But I'm going to go have myself a good cry, and that's me for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. Sweet dreams. I'll see you next time.